What's up everybody and welcome back to the channel. And yes, as the title of the video suggests, I have indeed created a fucking monster, but I regret nothing. This video I just wanted to share a build that I've been using with the Technomancer that I put together in about a day and a half's worth of playing, and I had some ideas that I wanted to try out with it. The idea basically being that obviously, yeah, you have to use blighted rounds because that's kind of like the end game build for the Technomancer. Keeping that up as long as possible, but then also trying to stack as many debuffs on the enemies as possible. Obviously with the idea being that when you get swarmed by a lot of enemies, I wanted to be able to deal with a lot of enemies at once and not just, you know, basically focus firing something down. So this was just me taking out Typhon, which is one of the later on hunts that you get. And here, of course, we have Outriders, which is everybody's favorite fucking titanium dealer. And yeah, as you can see, the build is extremely effective at, first of all, just spreading toxic around and also other debuffs. But just in general, just being able to deal a fucking disgusting amount of damage. This is, of course, on world tier 15. And so join me as we look at some of the requirements of the build, I would say. And then also basically something that I like about this is the fact that it's very modular in the way that you can start, you know, sort of building up towards this critical mass that you see here, where you're able to just deal all this damage and basically have a survivability and, yeah, just be able to deal with large amounts of AoE enemies coming at you and putting the AoE damage on them. But in any case, let's move on. Let's go check out exactly the details of the build. Okay, so looking at the build, the crux of the build obviously is the fact that you want to keep blighted rounds up as much as possible. This is really a lot of the end game builds when you're looking at the Pyromancer, when you're looking at the Trickster, and especially when you're looking at the Technomancer. A lot of the end game builds have this in, and the idea is to find some way to keep the, you know, the buff up for as long as possible. The Technomancer has the easiest way of doing this, where you have blighted rounds trick up your sleeve, which is while the skill is active, killing shots grant you a 30% extra bullets in your mag. Now, the point is that obviously the bigger the mag size, the more you get back every time you kill, which is easy to understand. So the best thing that you can go for is a light machine gun, but of course you also need a light machine gun that's dealing decent damage. And when I started out with the idea of this build, I knew, of course, that I was going to use blighted rounds. And the other thing about blighted rounds that you'll notice is that when you infect something with the toxic of blighted rounds, it spreads it around to a couple of the creatures around. So that got me to thinking that, you know, the toxic from blighted rounds is a poison effect. So what other, you know, area damage effects can we stack on at the same time, and to see basically having a build that can do as much damage to all creatures in a group and not just one specifically. I figured that this was basically my idea, that this would make later on expeditions all that much easier, because you're dropping entire groups of mobs at the same time and dealing damage to all of them and not just all of them. So originally when I set out, now of course I know that you might be looking at this build going, holy Jesus dude, you've got like two fucking you know, legendaries, so of course the build works because it's got two legendaries. But that's not where I started this from. The idea was that originally, and I have them here, I ran these two weapons. So the first one that I ran was an assault rifle, which, because I was top 3, so if we go here to skills, to class, you'll see I was top 3 and I had selected assault master, so I was getting the additional damage from there and everything like that. And that's really the idea of this, is as you're scaling up through world tiers, you can use this build to essentially, every time when you level up and when you get more pieces and when you assemble more into it, it just overall makes you stronger. So as I said, originally I started with this assault rifle, but my point here was the two buffs, the two add-ons, or the two mods, or whatever you want to call it, that I wanted to have on it was Hot Blood, and I wanted Bone Shrapnel. Bone Shrapnel is OP as fuck. So the thing is, Bone Shrapnel deals a bunch of damage. When you kill something, it explodes and it deals a bunch of damage to everything around that the thing that you've killed, and it gives them bleed. So there we have another debuff. So now we've got toxic and bleed already, right? Hot Blood, same thing. So bullets that hit an enemy that is below 50% of its life ricochet out to more enemies around it, also giving them burn. So now we're talking toxic, we're talking bleed, and we're talking burn. So we have 3 debuffs going already. Now, originally when I had built this out, you'll notice that the stats on my armor right now is bonus firepower, close range, and long range damage. That's how I've spec'd it over time. But originally, I had a lot of pieces that had status power on, because status power, of course, either increases the strength of an effect like toxic, for instance, or in the case of something like weakness or vulnerable, it makes it last longer. So it's very effective with dot kind of abilities that you put on, you know, enemies. So that was the basis of it. I started out with this assault rifle because it was the first assault rifle that I got bone shrapnel on, and coincidentally hot blood on as well. And I was like, holy shit, fucking uber roll. I don't have to re-roll anything. And the stats on it were not that great. It was close range damage, which is not necessarily what I wanted specifically, but it did have status power and it had crit damage, which is okay, right? So then eventually I found this guy, which was a light machine gun, which was set to the stabilizing variation, and the same thing. It had bone shrapnel and it had something else. So I was like, okay, fuck this. And I put hot blood on it. This also had status power on it. It had long range damage, which is great. And then it had weapon life leech, which was kind of, you know, irrelevant. But nonetheless, this was a far better option than the assault rifle, because there were situations where I was running out of bullets, where like the 40 bullets or something like that I had with the assault rifle was not enough for me to keep going, especially when it comes to, you know, shooting a boss. Now, when you deal with the fact that you have a light machine gun that has an 80 clip size, and then the buff that you get within the class here, the additional 50% mag, then you go up to 120 bullets. 120 bullets is a lot, to even to the point where if you're fighting a boss and 2 minions, you shoot the boss a little bit, you drop a minion, it gets you back up to your full ammo, you shoot the boss some more, you drop the second minion, or by that time the boss is low enough that you just end up piling all 120 bullets into the boss and kill it. So that's the kind of the idea of the build, and that is that I'm trying to stack as many debuffs onto creatures and as many creatures at one time, as many enemies at one time, and then basically do damage to them all. So then building the armor behind that, the idea is to complement those debuffs as much as possible. In my opinion, Bloodlust is another very good option, because again, as you are, your dots or your toxic or your burn or whatever is on the creatures around there, as they are falling over, you are getting additions to your firepower, and this stacks up to 3 times and deteriorates over 10 seconds, which is, you know, quite a bit of time. So very good option as a second tier there behind your blighted rounds trick up the sleeve, which is essential for this build. You definitely need to be able to re-engage the blighted rounds and keep it going, because this buff is where, you know, 90% of your damage is coming from. The second thing that, and this is something that I eventually started experimenting with, is the build is kind of glass cannony, and that is that eventually if something does make it to you through all of the shit that you're throwing downrange, then you might have a little problem with survivability. So Perseverance Shield for me was a good option, because what it allowed me to do is when you get almost, you know, fucking tagged and you're basically one hit away from dying, then it gives you that shield and you get a little bit of time to operate in. The crit stack here is something that I've been experimenting recently with, but definitely things that you can put in here, for instance, is the additional damage add-ons that you get, like for instance 15% additional damage to someone that's afflicted by burn, or 15% additional damage to someone that's afflicted by let's go over here, that's affected by bleed, because those add-ons exist and they're all going to stack on. And the cool thing about this is if you have a mob that is bleeding and that is toxic and that is burning, and you have all 3 of those other add-ons that say you deal 15% damage to something that's toxic, 15% damage additional to something that's bleeding, and 50% additional damage to something that's burning, all of those things will add together. And that's where a lot of the damage at the beginning of this, when you're building this and you don't have the perfect pieces yet, that's where a lot of the damage in this build comes from. On pants, I have, again, critical damage increased by 30%. This is after I started getting really decent damage and really high roll weapons, like in the case of my 2 legendaries that I have here. I was able to swap out some of these stats, sorry, some of these mods, like for instance additional damage due, to something that's burning or something like that. So those would definitely be the preference. But once you start getting decent weapons that can deal decent damage, then critical damage is a fantastic stat to stack, and probably one of the stronger ones in the game. So that is something that you can then start experimenting with. You'll notice here that I also have a critical shots inflict bleed on the enemy. So I have two different ways in which I can essentially, bring bleed onto a mob. Then over here I have that boost your damage against enemies afflicted with bleed by 15%. So there you can see that's one of the mods that I was talking about. I also have radical therapy, which increases by 15% to enemies that are affected by toxic. And then lastly here, I use rejuvenation, which is whenever my health is replenished. So this is exceptionally strong on the Technomancer, because the Technomancer gets health from basically doing anything. So whether you're damaging something with an ability or shooting with a gun or anything like that, you're going to get health. And as soon as you get health, if you've been damaged in any way, you're going to get that additional firepower, that additional armor, and additional anomaly power for 10 seconds. It's really, really good. Rejuvenation is fantastic. And then I also have Toxic Piercer, which basically increases the effectiveness of Toxic by a percentage that's based on 100% of your armor piercing. So again, if you tailor your build in such a way that you have a lot of armor piercing, then that's of course going to increase the magnitude of this as well. So that's the gist of it. And again, like I said, that was the basis even with these two weapons here. What I was then eventually able to do is find the Damascus, which in my opinion is, I would say, the ultimate version of this. It's got Claymore Torrent on it, which again damages 4 enemies within a 6-meter radius, dealing them with anomaly blades of 17477, and I've got Bone Shrapnel as well. So I've got 2 effects that are just applying a lot of AoE damage to everything. That's in essence basically the build. And as I've said, the idea here is to deal not just a lot of damage to one minion at a time, but also a lot of damage to everything around it. And the benefit that you have by stacking Toxic and Bleed and things like that on something is, even if you end up not downing something and it gets down behind cover or runs away or something like that, then usually the dots that are on there, end up finishing it off. So just as one last thing, well, 2 last things, let's just quickly discuss skills. So of course, Blighted Rounds is in here. I use Blighted Turret and Cryo Turret, but you'll notice that I don't always deploy them out. But if I know that I'm about to fight a boss or something like that, I put both turrets down right by my feet. And that means that if anything gets close to me, the turrets are going to freeze them, they're going to toxic them. And that's just going to give me a little bit of, mobility in terms of having to deal with, enemies that might, get past all of my gunfire. You can of course mod the Blighted Turret to also deal frozen damage, because frozen is really good in this because it essentially stops mobs from attacking you, so you can shoot them. And also the other thing is, sometimes these turrets actually pull quite a bit of aggro from enemies as well. So sometimes you'll find a boss or something like that will focus on the turret instead of you, which is of course a fantastic thing. Last thing, just the class here. You'll notice that of course, as I mentioned before, I've gone top tier, but I've gone and neglected to take any of these extra nodes here, basically focusing on exposing toxin, which gives something vulnerable as well, which is also great for additional damage, and also taking 2 sides of the power, which is essentially a glass cannon build. So you deal 20% more damage, but you also take 15% more. The rest is fairly standard with top 3, and as you can see, I've opted for some of the ones which basically, decrease and shrink the size of a long distance kill or a long range kill, and just basically going with weapon, buff perks and, armor piercing. That's essentially it. I'm going to leave the video running with me doing an expedition. I can say this, that obviously this as you've seen in the clips before this has no problem with world tier 15 at all. And I'm quite certain that you can chase all gold on all expeditions with this. I'm actually busy with this right now, but I figured that I'd release this video now already and show this, but I'll definitely post a follow-up just saying that. But all in all, I can just say that to me it feels that at this moment right now, having played a Trickster to full level, having played a Devastator to full level, and now having played a Technomancer to full level, definitely Technomancer feels to me like it was the easiest road to world tier 15. And then also once I got to world tier 15, it was the easiest way to just expand the character and just make it all around really, really powerful. So I definitely think I've yet to obviously take Pyromancer all the way, but I don't think that's going to change my mind. I think Technomancer is fucking ridiculously powerful. I don't know if people can fly is necessarily going to nerf certain things. It definitely does seem that they might nerf the blighted rounds and, you know, those kinds of abilities, because them being so fucking clinch on every single upper end tier build, except for Devastator, where you're going for, you know, bleed and a lot of armor and that sort of thing. Anyway, as I said, I'll leave you with me running an expedition. It's obviously not a max level expedition or something like that. I think it's a 7 or 8 or something like that. But enjoy the footage and let me know in the comments down below if you like this build, if it's something that you imagine that you'll be building, what you've been finding successful and what you've been enjoying and playing. And if you really like content like this, please go ahead and consider subscribing. It really does help me bring more stuff like this to the channel. But in any case, I just want to thank you for watching this, if you've watched this far, and go ahead and have a great morning, afternoon, and evening, wherever you are. And until next video, fucking cheers.
Before the insurgents do.
Seems Dunham has an insurgent problem on her back porch. What are they doing up here? The way through to the peak is blocked. Must be a way past it. Whoa, crap! I just released a hellboard out of that tunnel. Looks clear. Time to head for the peak. There's the pod. Good call,